As the sun dipped below the horizon, casting eerie shadows among the towering pines, I couldn't help but feel a shiver crawl down my spine. My hiking companions and I were about to embark on a treacherous journey through the heart of the Blackwood Forest, a place notorious for its unsettling tales of hauntings and unexplained disappearances. But we were thrill-seekers, hungry for adventure, and we dismissed the stories as mere superstitions. How wrong we were. My name is Alex, and I had always been fascinated by the untamed wilderness. It was that fascination that led me and 3 of my friends, Sarah, Mike, and Jess, to undertake a hiking trip through Blackwood Forest. We had meticulously planned the journey, packed our bags with enough supplies to last us a week, and set off on a crisp autumn morning. The forest lay in all its majesty before us, a thick carpet of fallen leaves underfoot and towering trees that reached for the sky. The first day was relatively uneventful. We made good progress, walking for hours through the woods, accompanied by the rustling leaves and the distant chirping of birds. We set up camp as the sun began its descent, feeling the thrill of adventure and freedom as we roasted marshmallows over a crackling campfire. The stories of the Blackwood Forest seemed distant and laughable. As we lay in our sleeping bags, the cool night air brushing against our faces, we told ghost stories, each one trying to outdo the other. Little did we know, the real horror was yet to come. We awoke to the soft patter of rain on the tent. It was still dark, and a palpable sense of unease filled the air. Jess, the most adventurous among us, suggested that we push on, reminding us that rain wouldn't dampen our spirits. So we packed up our camp in the rain, hiked onward, and I couldn't help but feel that the forest had changed overnight. The trees seemed taller and closer together, casting ominous shadows that swallowed the daylight. Hours passed, and we realized that we hadn't encountered any other hikers, which was unusual given that Blackwood was a popular hiking spot. Our map became unreliable, and the forest seemed to conspire against us. Trees leaned menacingly, and the underbrush grew denser, making each step feel like a struggle. The rain intensified, soaking us to the bone, and I couldn't shake the feeling that we were not alone. By nightfall, the rain had turned into a relentless downpour. We set up camp in a small clearing, huddled inside our soggy tents, trying to find solace in the midst of the storm. That night, the forest came alive with a symphony of eerie sounds. Branches creaked, leaves rustled, and strange, distant cries echoed through the trees. I lay in my sleeping bag, listening to the unsettling chorus, and wondered if the stories of Blackwood were more than just tales. The storm continued throughout the night, and sleep was nearly impossible. When morning came, the forest seemed different again. We couldn't find our bearings, and the map was virtually useless. Panic began to set in as the realization that we were lost in this eerie wilderness sank in. Our supplies were running low, and we needed to find our way back to the trail. As we trudged through the relentless rain, the atmosphere grew heavier, and a sense of foreboding clung to us like a wet shroud. We stumbled upon an abandoned cabin, its wood weathered and rotting. It was a haunting sight, but we had no choice but to seek shelter inside. The cabin's interior was as unsettling as its exterior. The air was damp and musty, and the dim light that filtered through the grimy windows cast long, menacing shadows. There were no signs of recent habitation, only faded photographs of families who had once sought refuge here. The unease grew as we explored further, discovering a journal that told stories of a family's descent into madness during a prolonged stay in Blackwood Forest. Fear gnawed at our hearts, but the storm raged on outside, and the cabin was our only sanctuary. We decided to spend the night there, trying to make ourselves as comfortable as possible in such a grim place. The journal's tales of strange happenings, inexplicable noises, and sleepless nights haunted us, and it became clear that this forest held secrets we were not prepared to uncover. The rain finally subsided, and with heavy hearts, we left the cabin behind. We felt like intruders in this haunted place, but our only desire was to escape it. Our food and water were nearly depleted, and we had to find our way back to the trail. The forest seemed to conspire against us, as if it wanted to keep us within its clutches forever. The day passed in a blur of uncertainty, with each step leading us deeper into the labyrinthine heart of Blackwood. The sense of being watched never left us, and our nerves were on edge. Jess, who had once been the most daring among us, now clung to her backpack, her eyes wide with fear. As night descended, we found a small clearing to set up camp. We barely spoke, our minds consumed by dread. The night was impossibly dark, the moon obscured by heavy clouds, and the forest was eerily quiet. There was no sound of wildlife, no wind in the trees, only an oppressive silence that pressed down on us. That night, I awoke to the sound of whispers. I strained my ears to listen, but the voices were faint, as if they were coming from a great distance. It was impossible to discern the words, but the tone was sinister, a spectral murmur that sent shivers down my spine. I cautiously unzipped my tent and looked out into the darkness. Sarah, Mike, and Jess were also awake, their faces ashen with fear. We decided to follow the whispers, thinking that they might lead us to other hikers who could help us find our way back. But as we moved deeper into the forest, the voices became more intense, and the sense of unease grew. Suddenly, we stumbled upon a clearing, and in its center was a circle of eerie, flickering lights. They danced like fireflies, but they were unlike any natural light I had ever seen. Their glow was an eerie blue, and they pulsed in an otherworldly rhythm. The whispers grew louder, more insistent, and I felt an inexplicable pull, as if the lights were beckoning us. We were caught in a trance, drawn closer to the lights, unable to resist their hypnotic allure. Panic surged within us, but our limbs moved of their own accord. As we entered the circle, the ground gave way beneath our feet, and we tumbled into a hidden underground chamber. The chamber was a nightmarish place. Its walls were covered in strange symbols and murals that depicted grotesque, inhuman figures. We were trapped, and the voices grew louder, filling our heads with a cacophony of unintelligible whispers. Fear and paranoia gripped us, and we turned on each other, accusing one another of leading us into this nightmare. Time lost all meaning in that sinister chamber. It could have been hours or days before we discovered a narrow tunnel leading deeper underground. Desperation forced us to venture down that ominous passageway, hoping it would lead to an escape. The further we descended, the more surreal the surroundings became. The tunnel was filled with an otherworldly luminescence that bathed the walls in an eerie, greenish light. As we delved deeper into the earth, we encountered a grotesque underground forest. Twisted, gnarled trees grew sideways from the walls, their roots curling like serpents, and their branches swayed with an unnatural, rhythmic motion. The ground was covered in a carpet of luminescent fungi, casting a haunting glow that revealed bizarre, crawling creatures. The whispers persisted, and the feeling of being watched intensified. We pressed on, driven by the desperate need to escape, even if it meant returning to the terrifying surface of Blackwood. Our ordeal in the underground world continued for what felt like an eternity. The tunnel led to a vast cavern, and in its center was a colossal, grotesque tree. Its bark was a sickly shade of black, and it was covered in writhing, nightmarish vines. The tree seemed alive, pulsating with a malevolent energy. Desperation gave us courage, and we realized that the tree held the key to our escape. We had to destroy it. Mike, with a makeshift torch, set the vines ablaze. The tree emitted a blood-curdling scream, and the entire underground world shuddered. The very earth itself rebelled against us, and we ran as fast as our trembling legs would carry us. We emerged from the underground nightmare, gasping for air and covered in filth, but the forest was not yet done with us. It had been 7 days since we had ventured into Blackwood, and we were no longer the same people. The forest had stolen our innocence, replacing it with an indelible scar of terror. We had returned to the surface, but the forest seemed even more sinister than before. The whispers persisted, and the trees loomed like ancient sentinels, watching our every move. We had lost track of time, and our supplies had dwindled to almost nothing. Every rustling leaf, every shadow, sent us into a state of paranoia. The forest toyed with us, leading us in circles, offering false hope, and then yanking it away. We had no choice but to keep moving, hoping that we would stumble upon the trail that would lead us out of Blackwood. That night, as we huddled around a feeble campfire, we heard a mournful, distant howl. It was a sound that froze the blood in our veins, a sound that should not exist in the heart of Blackwood. Jess, who had once been fearless, now looked at us with eyes filled with terror. We awoke to find Jess missing. Panic swept over us as we searched the surrounding area, calling out her name, but there was no response. The forest had claimed her, and we were helpless to save her. The feeling of being hunted had become all too real. We continued our journey, each step more agonizing than the last. Our minds were fractured by fear, and our bodies were weak from exhaustion. The forest seemed to mock us, leading us deeper into its heart, offering no escape. As night fell once more, we came upon a clearing, and there, in the center, was a circle of sinister, glowing lights, much like the ones that had ensnared us earlier. The whispers returned, more insistent than ever, filling our heads with dread. It was as if the forest itself was closing in on us, as if it had become a sentient, malevolent force. The forest had become a waking nightmare. We had lost count of the days, and hope had all but evaporated. The whispers, the eerie lights, the feeling of being watched, they were all suffocating us. Mike was on the verge of a breakdown, his eyes vacant, his words incoherent. Sarah and I clung to each other, our only source of solace in this waking nightmare. We pressed on, determined to survive, even as the forest seemed to delight in our torment. But the forest was not done with us. It had saved its most terrifying ordeal for last. We had reached a clearing where the moon shone bright and full, casting an eerie glow on the forest. The whispering voices reached a crescendo, and we felt an otherworldly presence closing in on us. Then, out of the darkness, emerged a figure, tall and gaunt, with eyes that glowed with an unnatural light. The figure moved with an otherworldly grace, and as it drew near, I could see its face. It was the embodiment of all our fears, a nightmarish creature that defied explanation. It had no mouth, only a row of sharp, gleaming teeth, and its skin was as pale as the moonlight. It reached out with long, bony fingers, and the whispers in our heads became screams of terror. I had never felt such a profound sense of dread. It was as if the very essence of the forest had taken form, and it was hungry for our souls. We turned and fled, running through the forest with the creature in pursuit. The forest seemed to come alive, its trees and vines reaching out to ensnare us. As we ran, the forest seemed to warp and change, its landscape shifting before our eyes. We were trapped in a nightmarish maze, and there was no escape. The creature was always just behind us, its presence growing stronger with each passing moment. Then, as if by some miracle, we stumbled upon the trail. We sprinted along it, the creature's sinister laughter echoing in our ears. It seemed that the forest itself was trying to prevent our escape, but we refused to give in. We emerged from Blackwood Forest, our bodies battered and our minds scarred by the horrors we had witnessed. We were changed, no longer the carefree adventurers who had entered the forest. Blackwood had taken something from us, something intangible but irreplaceable. We reported Jess as missing, and a search party was organized to find her, but they returned empty-handed. The forest had claimed her, as it had nearly claimed us. I can't explain the horrors we witnessed in Blackwood Forest, nor can I forget the feeling of being watched, of being pursued by an otherworldly force. The forest had a malevolent intelligence, and it reveled in our suffering. Blackwood Forest is a place of nightmares, a place where reality blurs and the boundary between the natural and the supernatural fades away. It is a place that should never be ventured into, for those who enter may never return. It is a place that I will never forget, and its horrors will haunt me for the rest of my days.